I am here with Daniel Ross, voice actor extraordinaire, colleague, and Emmy winner. Emmy winner Daniel Ross. Oh, how did that get there? This old thing?
Oh, I don't know. It's just it's taking up space behind me here.
You know,
How are you, man?
I'm doing great. Clearly not as good as you. Look at that thing. Look at that paperweight.
Come on.
That's
Man,
pretty
how long
impressive.
has it been since I saw you last?
Probably the last Tom and Jerry we did. So for those of you that don't know, they have brought back Tom and Jerry. Some really fun episodes of Tom and Jerry are back out there, and even a Tom and Jerry movie where I actually played the heavy in the Tom and Jerry movie. I was the villain. Wait, let me look up his name. I'll edit this part out of me having to look up the name. Tom and Jerry Cowboy something. Let me see.
Oh,
Where is it?
the Western one.
Cowboy Up. Yeah.
Yeah, I auditioned for that. I didn't get in that one.
You didn't get in that one.
No.
All right. I got in, but it was probably because, well, it's definitely because they wanted basically an impression of Harvey Korman from Blazing Saddles. He played Hedley Lamar. Well, I did August Critchley. So yeah, I played August Critchley, and it's basically me doing Hedley Lamar from Blazing Saddles. You know, some sort of riff on that. But okay. So the Tom and Jerry stuff you and I have done. Wir sind mice, right?
That's right. Yeah,
Right.
we had the distinct fortune of working on, gosh, it was like 3 seasons almost of
It was.
material.
It was, yeah. And I remember we would show up, we would do our mice noises, and I would capture a few zany pictures of us in the studio, and then they would pitch them way up. So I'd
That's
show them to
right.
my kids. Yeah, I'd say, "That's Dad," and they'd think, "No, it's not. It doesn't sound anything like
Mine's
you."
already the pitched up one because I played Rutger and you
Yeah.
were Rudy and Rolf.
Right. And one of
Yes.
them was down here. I think that was Rolf. I'm not sure.
That was Rolf.
And then one of them was Rudy.
That was Rudy.
Yeah.
And this was Rutger.
Exactly. No matter how high I went, Daniel could go a step higher. It's a special thing.
There were a couple sessions you turned to me and you're like, "Your ball's okay."
Yeah,
Everything
man. You
good?"
get,
I was like, "Yeah, everything is good. Yeah."
yeah. How's the package? Yeah. Yeah. I
Oh,
did.
good.
I find all of these things impressive. Like, for example, I've got a pretty good range. I have never in my life been able to do anything close to a Donald Duck voice. I don't know how it's done. I can't do it. It's been frustrating since I was a kid. All I could ever do is go, and I can't open my mouth. I can't do anything else. And it's just like magic.
It's almost second nature to me, and I say that because knowing that it is probably the hardest voice to
Yeah.
do.
Oh, it is.
Lots of people try to do, and
Right.
it's just very difficult. I started when I was 3 years old,
Really?
so I've had years and years of practice. Yeah, my mom taught me how to do the voice when I was a little kid,
Really?
and we would throw that back and forth all the time, and no matter how awkward things might get, we could always make each other laugh. We could quack each other up by doing a little duck talk. The technical term is buccal speech, Buccal, and that just means that there's a pocket of air in the cheek that you make noise from. So right where my dimple is, that's where the sound comes from. And
I
yeah,
have that.
it was an impression for friends. It was a people trick, that I would make kids smile and make everybody happy with. And I never in a million years thought that I'd come to LA and have an opportunity to use it. I always thought, okay, I've got to reappropriate it as like barking like a pug, or something like that.
Right.
Or if I played somebody's diarrhea, like something like that. That was what I anticipated.
Wholesome stuff.
And so when Disney came around, I was like, no way. And went through the process, and here we are all these years later. It's mind-boggling to me.
Right. And then you get an Emmy for it. And
then I got an Emmy for it. That was the icing on the cake.
that's got to be some pretty heavy duty icing, because performing as Donald Duck, first of all, doing the voice. Okay, so doing the voice is already hard enough, but there still has to be a performance in there. You can't just recite the words and let the texture and the profile of the voice do the work for you. There are still peaks and valleys. There are still nuances in there that you have to hit.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, that was something I took really seriously. When everything came around and I booked the gig, I went in for my first day. I was green behind the ears. I was still a new voice actor to Los Angeles.
Right.
I moved here in 2014.
Okay.
And I booked this in 2015. And so, I was still freshly getting an agent,
right,
freshly getting my bearings, not really knowing the dynamic of going into a session and working with a team and a director. This was all new to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so to be thrust into this position with such a massive, well-known character, I mean, the pressure was on, and I wanted to get it right because the character meant so much to me. So I went back and I watched 80 plus years of content, listening for all the little isms and all the things that I could extract and bring into my performance. I use as an example the difference between Donald laughing, kind of a diaphragmatic laugh, compared to his chuckle, which is, different sound completely. You use that. When do you bring that out? And knowing those moments was really important to me. So, in concert with my voice director, Kelly Ward, he guided me through the process, and eventually it felt like second nature to me. I could kind of step back and be like, here you are, speaking and channeling through me.
Right.
And that was a really awesome moment.
And if you're watching 80 years of it, obviously you're starting with, I believe it was Clarence Nash that started
Yes,
it.
Stucky Nash.
Yes. And I remember reading years ago, I guess they were probably a few years into him doing Donald Duck, and they wanted to do something where either he was in water or he was doing something with water. And he said, I almost drowned trying to get the effect they wanted me to have. But this is, I guess, when Walt was up for trying anything, Clarence, Yeah. And
a little bit of waterboarding, death. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
Fine.
I mean, Mel Blanc famously used to chew carrots when he did Bugs Bunny, and he hated carrots. So I don't know if there were ever any little tricks you did to help you feel more Donald-ish, or it was a technical exercise. Once you were in that pocket, you were off and running.
There was some trickiness to it because initially, again, it was just an impression that I did for friends.
Right.
It's very different when you get up right close to a microphone and it hears every mouth noise, every noise in sinus, every stomach gurgle. Mm-hmm. And there was an additional exhalation of breath, like that was coming through, and I had to try to figure out how to curb that. Uh-huh. Likewise, because it's a muscle, it would get tired. And so I wouldn't be able to sustain for long periods of time, and I had to work it up. I had to do exercises. I had to figure things out. If I hold my nose, how does that close my sinus? If I put my fingers in my ears, if I hold my cheek, if I do this, I was doing every single thing that I possibly could to master the output. And eventually I found it, and it worked, and it sounded like the character to me. But it was very interesting, Chris, because when I first started, they handed me a piece of paper, and it was almost like a holy grail. Mm-hmm. It was all the words that Clarence Nash had difficulty saying in the character voice so that the writers could then write around those words. Uh-huh. And they handed this paper to me and said, here you go. And I looked at it and I went, I can say all of this. And it just so turns out I always considered myself a master of buccal speech.
Right.
I can say just about anything, and I can speak in other languages. So they utilized that to their advantage with the shows that I worked on because they really wanted Donald to drive more of the narrative of the story. Uh-huh. And you know the shtick. Anytime he'd say something, what do you say? What do you say? Okay, that's the funny part.
Right.
But then you would have the technical aspect of the other characters repeating what Donald said so that the audience would understand it clearly. Mickey would chime in and, say, oh, that's what you said. Or, oh, yeah, we're going to do this. Whatever he was saying, they would repeat. Yeah. And in my case, they didn't have to do that. So they were able to play in different arenas with the character story-wise that was just so satisfying.
Really? No, that's interesting. Of course, there's probably a Donald Duck purist out there saying, Donald would never say that. He literally can't say that. Well, he can now. How about that? He's been working with a speech therapist. He's turned a
Yeah.
corner. Right.
See,
This is Donald 2.0.
I look at it this way, that's in the hands of the writers.
Yeah.
If they wanted me to sound like classic Clarence Nash Donald, I can do that. And I hear the difference between my version and his version. As an example, Clarence might say, whereas I would say,
right.
So, but that was part of what they asked for. They said, this is for the younger audience. We want to pitch him up slightly. We want him to enunciate. And I was like, here you go. And I think that's what booked me the job.
Yeah. And the Emmy was was it for a special or for a series?
Yes, it was my curtain call as Donald on a special called Mickey and Minnie Wish Upon a Christmas.
Okay. Gotcha. And before that, you had done it on a series. Correct.
Yeah, we did Mickey and the Roadster Racers. We started with that. Mickey Mouse Mixed Up Adventures, Chip and Dale's Nutty Tales, Mickey Mouse Hot Diggity Dog Tales. I even did some Minnie's Bow Tunes. There was a stop motion series of commercials that we did. So, there was a window of time related to the show that I was working on that we were doing that.
Gotcha.
But Tony Anselmo has been the official voice of Donald Duck for over 30 years. He's still doing the voice to this day and, probably many years to come. But who knows what the future holds? I have a feeling in the pit of my stomach that I'm not quite done with the character yet. But for the time being, I'm working on other things.
Yes, exactly. Well, that is the beauty of being a voice actor. You're not ever tied down to just one role. And like, for example, you and I worked together on Tom and Jerry. And that was something we just felt like, oh, this seems like the mice are just going to be in an episode or two. But they would keep calling us back, and then another season, then another season. And I just thought, well, this is great. This is like, gravy every time they call. We get to play around, have a good time, and then we leave. And, I always thought, all right, this is probably the last one. And then they would keep calling.
And in fact, when our show ended, they brought us back for Tom and Jerry in New York.
Yeah.
Which was a whole other series.
Right.
So, yeah, that was a nice through line that we had. We did seasons 3, 4, and 5 of the Tom and Jerry show. I think that started in 2017, I want to say, or 2014, 2017, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
But yeah, we had a lot of work to do, and our characters were in many episodes, which was just so much fun.
Yeah, and everything now is pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. So these were all pre-pandemic sessions, which were always in a studio, and then everything changed, and it changed for me. It changed for everybody. When the pandemic hit, I had, for the most part, I had wrapped up the series work I'd been doing, with the exception of The Simpsons, which may it never go off the air. I get to continue to do. But I was wrapping up contributions to things like F is for Family, things like that. That was on Netflix. And I noticed the change for them was, we'll have you do things from home, like we were doing table reads from home. And then occasionally they would have me come into a studio. And that was true for a lot of actors. And then I don't know how much it's happening now, but I think as the entire industry started figuring out remote work, from every angle, more and more actors are able to work from home without any hiccups. And has that been the case with you?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I love going into the studio.
Yeah.
Because nothing beats it. Nothing beats seeing your peers and colleagues, shaking hands and feeling the excitement and energy of everybody in the room, or just playing around and being silly. It adds to the performance.
It does.
And when everything happened, when the world ended, we had to take care of the technical aspect of things. We couldn't just focus on the performance. We had to make sure our levels were good. We had to make sure our environment was good. Oh, there's an airplane coming. Hold on a second, everybody. Like, you don't have those considerations when you go into a studio where it's a controlled environment.
Right.
So I missed that tremendously. But I will say, jumping back a little bit, I remember our first session together. I was entirely intimidated getting into the booth with you. because
Really?
again, this was still very early in my career. 2017-ish, I think, is when we started. And so I was only a couple of years into the industry as a voice actor, and I knew your credits, everything that preceded you. And I almost had to give myself permission to be silly around you. And as I saw you being silly and
Oh yeah.
improvising, I mean, you walked in like it's just another day, and here we go. And then you just break into character. And I'm looking at that, and I'm like, wow, that's awesome.
That's
And over time, it was just easier and easier and easier. But yeah, man, like you are a famous voice actor with so many amazing credits behind your belt, and I
well,
got
it's
to play in the booth with you, and that's what I was saying to myself when I walked to the car. I was like, "Holy crap, that's Chris Edgley! I got to play with him in the booth, yes!"
you're
And
you're too
that
kind.
that feeling never goes away when I get to work with folks like yourself.
Well, and believe me, I take that as a high compliment from you because I know at this point you've worked with a lot of very big names. But whenever I get a little happy with myself and I check out my IMDb, I just go look at some of my colleagues' IMDb's and I see that they've done 3 times as many things, 4 times as many things as me. Yeah, okay, all right,
It's
yeah,
not the size of the IMDb that counts.
yeah, it's the yeah, it's the quality of the work is what it is
That's it.
there. Yeah. Because yeah, I'm sure you're starting to feel this way as well. As the credits roll up, as the credits pile up, you're starting to feel like, okay, all right, I can do this. I belong here. I belong in this business. There's no imposter syndrome happening, and you just sort of you settle into that rhythm of it. And
I
after a
don't think
while, you
imposter
notice,
syndrome ever goes away, though.
yeah, well,
To
it
this day,
depends. I've
I
never
just
had
every
it.
time I feel like I'm in the room with somebody or I'm getting to work on a specific job, I'm like, really? Like,
Yeah,
I don't know. It's not that I don't understand what my capabilities are, my
right.
strengths, and what I'm doing, but I just, as a working actor,
Hmm.
to say that I'm a working actor means the world to me.
I would say that I would differentiate that feeling of, wow, I can't believe how wonderful this is and how lucky I am, which we all feel, from imposter syndrome, where that's that voice saying, you don't belong here, you're not good enough. That some people really do deal with that. I've never dealt with that. I mean, I've had my nervous moments if somebody really, and really with a lot of big credits walks into the room. But even then, I would sometimes look at myself and say, yeah, but I can do some things too. And so I would always just say, nah, that I'm a natural performer, so I usually was just excited to be there. I
Yeah.
would feel not necessarily imposter syndrome, but I could feel real intimidation in my stand-up days when I would see certain people. I'd think, oh, okay, I'm not ready to bring it like that person can. Right? That was a real thing. And believe me, in the booth, in voice acting, I have been, whether it was, I don't know if it was intimidation or not, but just outright admiration and awe for certain actors. I'll never forget watching Jeff Bennett up close for the first time. I thought, Jesus, this guy's amazing. And I really didn't know he was as good as he was. And then I told Pat Brady later, my agent, and she said, oh, yeah, Jeff's one of the best that ever do it. And I said, yeah, and I got to stand next to him. We were working on something together. Yeah. So, I mean, and that was 15 years ago. So,
Wow.
yeah, and Jeff's still out there doing it. So, yeah, this business is filled with people that have that level of talent, and yet when you talk to them, you still get the sense that they feel as lucky as we feel.
It's one of the reasons I decided to go into voice acting specifically because I love the people.
Yeah,
I started out as a fan. I don't know if you see behind me. I collect Transformers. I
a
have
bit.
my whole kit. I have Cybertronian on me. I'm a big geek.
Yeah,
And I've always loved that brand. And that kind of got me into going to conventions,
right.
meeting their voice actors. And I very quickly realized these people are like me. They're
Yeah,
kind of quirky. They
yep.
love what they do. The ego is through the floor, and why couldn't I do that? Why couldn't
Right.
couldn't that be something I do? I always felt like my voice was a hindrance to me because I started in theater and
Hmm.
film, and my voice is just kind of quirky, and I wouldn't book the roles that I wanted to. I wasn't booking the leading man. I was always booking the character roles, the
Uh,
quirky friend or next door neighbor or the guy who does a silly voice. That was always my gig. And I hated that. But it wasn't until later in life that I realized that was my superpower.
Right.
And that's what I needed to lean into. And as soon as I did that, that's when I started to see some success. That's when I started to work as an actor. And now I embrace it. I embrace it fully. And I couldn't be more happy for that.
That's what's great about voice acting is it is possible to play a very wide range, much wider range than you would in on camera or even to a degree theater. I mean, with theater, sometimes the audience is willing to suspend their disbelief quite a bit.
Yeah.
But with on camera acting, if it's not something they can make you up to be, they tend to not cast you or even submit you for things like that. And it's been forever and a day since I've done on camera. But like you, I very quickly got slotted into the goofy best friend parts. And I was fine with that because even if I ever read for the lead, it was usually the everyman kind of lead. So you get a sense very quickly of where you kind of feel comfortable. And then not to say that there aren't the anti-heroes and the say the Nicolas Cages, the Adam Sandlers, who are leading men, but they don't typically look like your leading men. They don't behave like leading men. But in voice acting, you can be all of them. You can sound heroic, and you can sound crazy and nebbish, and all kinds of different things. You know how it goes. Like you say, once you lean into that, there's no end to the opportunities.
That's right. That's right. And look, I'm grateful to be in a community that has embraced me and welcomed me and, to just be a working actor, to find that niche and to live in a way that I'm not, starving paycheck to paycheck. Granted, it is, a feast or famine kind of industry, but there's enough work that I've built my reputation. I've built my ethic.
Right.
People know who I am. I work, and I just can't wrap my head around that sometimes. Thinking about the person that I used to be. There was a brief stint in my life where I was homeless on the street. I was panhandling. Somebody stole my shoes. I was sleeping behind a 7-Eleven, and I thought to myself, what do I want to do with my life? And it was acting, the performing arts. I love being able to stir emotion in other people. And I always thought when I'd go to the movie theater, the same movie theater, and I'd go see a different movie and I'd be transported somewhere and I would see things that I would maybe never see with my own eyes or feel things that were out of the scope of my normal day-to-day life. That to me was pure magic. And I wanted to do that for other people. I wanted to create more of that in the world. And so the performing arts is where I kind of stuck myself. And it started again with Shakespeare and, being a thespian and theater, school plays. And then from there to film and TV, and then to production, to making my own opportunities. And now here we are in voice acting all these years later.
Here we are. Now,
it's wild, man.
How long ago was it that you were homeless?
This was in my late, I think it was like around 16, early 17. It was around that time. That was a tough window in my life and a very defining part of my life.
You were 16 or 17?
I think it was like late 16, early 17 years old.
Okay, yeah, because I was thinking, wait, 2016? You could have just called me, brother. I'd have gotten you a sandwich at least.
The year was 1916. I'm about older than I let on.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so 16 or 17, that's a rough age to be. Look, there is no, I tell you the great age to be homeless, right? There's no easy age to be homeless. But 16 or 17 is when, I don't have to tell you that, most kids that age, because you're a kid, get to sleep in their room. And mom and dad are there, or at least in my case, mom is there. And you get breakfast made for you, and you go to school, and here you are with none of that?
Nope.
Wow.
Nope. So my folks, I grew up in, middle class, I would say lower middle class. My dad was a dentist,
Hmm.
and my mom was a stay-at-home artist. My creative inspiration, and so my parents had very different schedules, and eventually, their marriage dissipated. But it was a very ugly time in my
Right.
life, and to I don't want to reveal too much, but to my parents, they were going through their own emotional turmoil at the
Right.
time, and I just was there during all of that,
Hmm.
and I ended up, running away at one point, and
Okay.
that was that I, was on the streets for
Gotcha.
a couple of it was I think it was like two or 3 weeks. It was about 2 or 3 weeks, I think.
Gotcha.
And so it wasn't a very long time. I ended up living with my grandparents, and then I was couch surfing,
Right.
until I finally got on my feet again. But it was a very long process, and yeah, and so again, I was just working in the area. I worked in retail for much of my adult life. I was a waiter. I worked at doctors' offices, and I always wanted to do something in the performing arts. So my buddy Justin Timpane and I, uh, we were struggling actors working in the DC Baltimore area, and we were just bouncing from like independent horror film to this and that, and we were like, why don't we, make our own? Like, let's max out our credit cards and see what we can make. And we started with a schlocky horror comedy called Ninjas versus Zombies.
Hmm.
And at the time, I was working at Blockbuster as a store manager. So we just walked around and we were like, what movie isn't on the shelves? And
Right.
so we came up with Ninjas versus Zombies and wrote around the premise. And it took off. We got it internationally sold. We got it on Netflix.
Really?
Uh, we did a sequel, Ninjas versus Vampires. That blew up, went international. I had friends who were overseas, serving overseas in Iraq at the time, sending pictures of bootleg copies of my movie on the streets in
Really?
Baghdad. And yeah, so we finished with Ninjas versus Monsters, and we made our trilogy. And all of a sudden, it was like, okay, I'm kind of a big fish in a little pond. I can kind of pick and choose what projects I want to be on, but I still have to have a day job.
Right.
Um, and so after that journey and producing other films, I always wanted to come out here to LA,
Hmm.
give it a shot, see what I could do.
Right.
And so I did. I said goodbye to my friends and family and the film production company, and drove out here on a chance of seeing what I could do with voiceover. And
Right.
here we are, all these years later. It was a good choice. Um,
It worked out.
no regrets. I'm reaching over here because I have here's the Blu-ray
Okay.
trilogy pack of my
All right. So
schlocky.
ninjas versus basically everybody. Okay. So there are
Ninja
different.
everybody.
Yeah. There are three in the series. I see. Okay. And what city were you in when you were doing all this?
So I lived in Maryland, so I was
Okay.
between DC and Baltimore most of the
Okay.
time.
Gotcha. They're about an hour apart from each other, roughly,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. I was born in Silver Spring. We must have
No
talked
way,
about
I
this at
was
some.
too.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that means you were born in Holy Cross Hospital, and so was I. Yeah. There's only one hospital in Silver Spring.
Well, mine was technically Tacoma Park.
Okay. Well,
It
I
was Tacoma
see.
Park.
My parents divorced when I was two, and so mom took the boys, my brothers and me, down to Savannah, Georgia, where she was from. Also, where my dad was from, but my dad was working a government job. He stayed up there. She went back home to where her parents were so she could have her support, and that's the way we did that. But so at two, I left Silver Spring, so I've never known anything else about it. But that is technically where I was born and technically the state I was born in. So anytime anyone says like the DC area, I think, okay, because I would still visit dad, and my uncle lived in Northern Virginia. So I got to know that area a little bit. And of course, you're probably going to do much better getting into theater in the DC area than you are into film. Unless you're
Sure.
like a John Waters type, he's Baltimore. And Barry
Well, the
Levinson's from
only
Baltimore.
opportunities were really like because of the scenery, because of the setting.
Yeah,
Washington, D.C., okay, there's going to be a political film or
right.
a spy thriller,
Yeah,
or things like The Wire, which filmed up in Baltimore that
Baltimore.
I was able to work on. But that is so crazy. You and I
Yeah.
are from the same stock. I mean, I grew up in Silver Spring. That's
Yep.
that's wild, man.
Yeah, I would visit my dad in Gaithersburg, Maryland, because as he would ascend through his career, because he ended up a pretty high level government executive, and then he retired. But he first lived in Rockville, had like an apartment. Yep. Then he moved up to a townhome in Gaithersburg, and then like a house outside of Gaithersburg. And I was coming from probably, lower end of middle class in Savannah. And, I never lacked anything, but, everything was hand-me-downs from my brothers and all that. And my dad was busy, not living, like a rich guy, but just everything was a little bit more comfortable. And then even the suburbs they were in were nice, and it seemed more like the people I saw in movies seemed to be from that neighborhood more so than they were from my neighborhood back home. And I always thought that I was somehow visiting some sort of dreamland when I would visit my dad in Gaithersburg, Maryland, up in Montgomery County. And and people would probably look at me if I said that, who are from there, and say, "What do you mean? It was boring. It was suburbs." It's like, that's what I saw on TV all the time. All those Spielberg movies, they looked like, like almost any 80s movie in a suburb felt like Gaithersburg, Maryland to me. That was my experience.
For me, it was up I-270. That was basically, where I lived. Silver Spring, Rockville, Gaithersburg, Germantown, even up to Frederick. Frederick is where I ended up leaving, coming to LA, and I loved Frederick.
Yeah.
Frederick was kind of like this eclectic mix of like old Civil War architecture and really creative like arts and crafts. Like kind of the kooky people from Montgomery County would come up to Frederick. And I really enjoyed that. I would absolutely go back and live in Frederick if I could.
Well, you probably could at this point if everything we're doing is remote. I mean,
yeah, well, that's something to take into consideration. I love being where I am, but it's becoming less and less relevant for me to be anchored here.
Right.
And I think a lot of other voice actors are realizing the same thing.
I think some of our peers have already begun to decide where they would most prefer to live, because before the pandemic, that was never an issue, except the only people I knew that could live wherever they wanted were people that would regularly do trailers and promos, because they were typically just ISDN patching into studios. And they were never going in because it was such short notice. It was always from home. So they could live anywhere. I think a lot of voice actors we know started asking themselves, okay, how close to LA do I still want to live? And in my case, I went from living more on the west side of LA to farther outside of LA. But I'm still in LA. I can drive in if anyone needs me to. But I know people that have left this coast. Some people have gone completely to the other side of the country, and it hasn't changed for them. So, yeah, I guess it is,
It's expensive to live here, but, that's a question. I do a lot of coaching these days.
Okay.
And a lot of my students ask me, do I really have to be there in LA in order to book these things?
Right.
And my answer is still yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you do need to be here. You have to shake hands, make eye contact, kiss some babies, go get coffee, go do lunch, do the whole Hollywood thing. You have to do that. People have to know who you are.
Right.
So once you've been established and you are, getting work on a regular basis, then you can start thinking about where else, can I do this?
Right.
And I'm, honestly, like thinking about those same questions myself. Do I physically have to be here? Because these days I have the option. Do you want to go into the studio or do you want to record it from home?
Right.
It's not as difficult a proposition as it used to be. But again, there's always those opportunities, and I would prefer to go into the studio.
I do get asked that a bit too. It's always newer actors who usually have some trepidation about moving out here, either because of the expense or because it can be intimidating. This is a great big city. It was intimidating for me, and I came from Orlando. I moved from Savannah to Orlando when I was ready to strike out on my own, and I thought that's a good place to get your training wheels off. And I had a roommate, someone I knew from college. We were getting into stand-up comedy around the same time. So I did that with him, and we sort of, began to find our footing in our own separate paths. But Orlando is a good mid-sized market to get started in. And even then, after 4 years of that, after having some success, moving out to LA was still intimidating because it is a really spread out city. You spend most of your time trying to figure out where you are. This is before GPS, kids. We had something called the Thomas Guide, which is as thick as a phone book. Like most cities, you have a map, it's one page. The Thomas Guide was a book this thick of all the different streets and grids and blocks of LA. And in order to find where you were going, you had to consult some sort of weird hieroglyphic. It's almost like using a slide rule to find out what grid of what page of that book you were supposed to drive to from where you currently were. It was insane.
You had to use a decoder and smoke
A
signals.
lot. It was
and
a
carrier
lot.
pigeon.
Yeah, it was a lot. And now you can say, "Oh, it's traffic," and people always know your app you're using should have told you about the traffic. I got lost. How did you get lost? No one can get lost in a big city.
The good old days of MapQuest, where you'd go online and you'd print it out and you'd bring it with you and hope for the best.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I do understand how a lot of people can feel intimidated about the prospect of moving out here. And I've seen Bob Bergen say this on Twitter as well when he is asked. He also believes, as you do, if you're new, you need to be out here because all of the people getting into the business and finding their footing in this business are out here. They are communicating with each other. They're connecting with each other. They're taking classes and workshops together. So they're fine-tuning their skills in a way that someone doing it remotely is not going to have access to. Even if you find a tribe of artists wherever you are, it's highly unlikely that it is going to be the same as the tribe of actors and performers and overall weirdos that we all are out here. The talent pool is deepest here.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it.
Who was a transport took a risk, took a really, really big risk. And that means something, I think, to the people that are here in the industry. You know, you didn't just, come up in the industry. It's you fought to be here. And right. I respect that. And I think there's a lot to be said about that.
Right. And for a lot of people, there's continuing education. In my case, I get enough, luckily, I get enough auditions where I'm always pretty busy as far as what kind of performance I'm practicing giving. And I usually have something going on where I get to work with other professionals and I get direction from them. But for people who might find the auditions coming fewer and farther between, or from people who maybe are still just getting started, I will probably do a video on this. But live performing of any kind is extremely important, in my opinion. If you have a theater background, if you have a stand-up comedy background, if you're in an improv troupe, that is a major plus. The skills you build from doing that. And I'm sure you found the same.
Oh, yeah. And in fact, I kind of proved myself one of those points during 2020, during the pandemic, because, TikTok had just come out and people were going on it. And I'm like, another social media platform. Come on. I'm already busy with the Facebookies and the Instagrammies and the Twitters and all that. Another one.
Right.
And I realized very quickly when I started to discover, hey, I want to post this kind of content, or I want to be funny, or I want to do character work. I realized very quickly that I had put myself into a box in order to fit into the community and to fit in with the parameters, to be seen and acknowledged.
Right.
And I think one of my first videos was there was a skit of, I think the audio was, "What's he thinking about?" And it was like zooming in on my head.
Yeah.
And it cuts to me in the shower squirting ketchup, mustard, and mayonnaise all over myself. And I had a moment when I was filming that, and I'm thinking to myself, am I really doing this? What are people going to think of me? and I said, you know what? I don't care. Yeah. I squirted it all over myself. And this was right before the lockdown. I was going to a workshop, and one of the people who was running the workshop said, "Hey, I saw your TikTok. That was interesting." And I'm like, "Oh crap! Oh no, I've ruined everything." And that actually was the winning combination. As soon as I took the veneer down and said, "Here's me,"
Right.
This is me. This is the authentic version of myself. I started getting followers and opportunities, and things started coming my way. And it was like, oh, that's the formula. I
Hmm.
don't have to fit in to do these things. I just have to present who I am and hope for the best.
Yeah.
But, in that situation, it has absolutely been a huge tool and an asset. And it's something that I really enjoy doing. And I have the freedom to be able to just do whatever I want. Hey, everybody, here's a glimpse into my life. Here's a glimpse into who I am, the things that I like, the things that I don't like. Let's laugh together. Let's cry together. You know, that's a perspective that I don't think a lot of us actors have had access to. People see the finished product and that's their impression of who we are.
Yeah.
And now we have the ability to dive even deeper into that. And yeah, it requires a lot more work. It's a lot more intensive, and you got to do more things than just your craft.
Hmm.
But that's what we do. We wear all kinds of hats. We make our own websites. We do our own graphic design in certain instances. We do our own marketing, our own PR, our own social media, unless you are affluent enough to hire people to help you with those things.
Yeah.
But it's so much. I don't even know where I was going with that, but yeah,
Well,
I was grateful for TikTok back in
now,
2020 and sharing my authentic self.
yeah, and I think it's good that you learned that lesson fairly early enough in your career, because I spent my entire stand-up career, which is about 10 years of being a touring road comedian. I spent that time chasing what I thought I was supposed to do instead of doing exactly what you talked about, which was say to myself, okay, how about I just leave aside what I think the industry of tastemakers wants in their next big thing, comedian? Or how about I
Mm-hmm.
leave aside what the audience might want and do what I want to do and just make sure that I make it accessible? So if you're up there and you're just expressing yourself, but there are no jokes, there are no punchlines, well, you're not really a comedian, you're a performance artist, and that's fine, go be a performance artist. But a comedian still gets laughs. And so I thought,
Yeah.
okay, I always knew in the back of my mind, you've got to at some point make a leap and start doing more material that you really want to do, that expresses who you are, instead of trying to figure out what all of those folks, these invisible people in your head that you've created as the people who will discover you and make you a star, what they might want. And I never fully committed to that. And predictably, I kind of fell out of love with the idea of being a touring comedian, because you start to grind. You say, I can't abandon the act I have now because it's helping me move up in the clubs. And if I start to experiment too much, I might lose the laughs, and then I won't get booked because I'm not as strong. And then I have to make rent. And this is the artist's dilemma. Will I try a commercial path so I can be successful? Or will I simply listen to that tuning fork inside of me and do that which resonates with me and wait for my audience to find me and just keep working at it? I've always
I will say
admired the comedians and the artists that do that.
there was one caveat to my shtick, and
Yeah,
that was, hey, I'm doing family-friendly content these days,
right.
so my output is going to reflect that. So my TikTok channel, for example, is very family friendly. I would say we are no more than PG to teetering maybe PG-13 on occasion,
Right.
but nothing above that. And me in my own personal life, man, I'm an NC-17 movie. Like, oh
Right.
my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah.
You should have heard me before I got into voice acting. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I am a vociferous potty mouth. But I wanted to ask you something based on, all your experience
Yeah.
with stand up and
Mhm.
your gobs of experience in voiceover and otherwise. What is it that brings you the most satisfaction these days? What brings you the most creative satisfaction?
Well, it's a mix. It's a good question, too, because it's something I would ask myself a lot. Obviously, getting to work on The Simpsons is, believe it or not, one of the most creatively satisfying things I can do. And a lot of times I'm just filling in little peripheral voices here and there. But I know that I'm still being challenged by that. And the fact that you get to work on, in my opinion, the greatest show ever, with people operating at their peak creative capacity, is wonderful. And I would say getting to be a part of Apex Legends, which is an ongoing game, that's
Oh
very
yeah.
satisfying because it's a character that I like. It's Pathfinder. He's really happy. He's kind of a clueless robot, but I've come to love this character. And so doing the lines is really fun. And when you're lucky enough to get a lot of auditions, after a while, you don't get to all of them. But I try to find particular auditions that I know I'm going to sort of savor. You know, there are those characters that you get to read for, and you say to yourself, all right, I don't know what my odds are of booking this, but by God, I'm sure going to have fun submitting this audition. I'm treating this as though I've already got the job, and the director has said, all right, we've got a couple in the can. Do something you want to do. Those are some of the most joyous words an actor can hear. Give me one doing whatever you want to do with it. So I find those moments in auditions where I can play around a bit and almost dare them to book me off of that. And usually they don't, but I don't have any control over that. And Lord knows I've done this long enough. This is my 20th year with this agency. I've tried it every which way you can. So at a certain point, I have to make sure I'm still amusing myself. From the voice acting perspective, it's getting to work at a high level with some of the best people in the business. Getting to do a character consistently that you enjoy, you know that feeling as well. And then on your auditions, trying to find moments. Some people do this with every audition. They basically say, I dare you to book this choice I just made. That's their whole approach. With me, I have a mix. And then as far as other creative stuff, I have a stream on Twitch I do where I've created a community that of other like-minded freakazoids like myself, where we check in with each other. We play a little bit of the Apex on Fridays, and on Thursdays we do creative things. On Saturdays I have coffee and donuts and I talk about whatever comes into my diseased imagination. So being a part of that community and creating content for it for my Patreon, where I talk about mental health issues, that people are like, how do you deal with anxiety? I'm going to be doing videos about that. How do you cope with the day-to-day challenges of life? Fitness and nutrition, and my fitness and nutrition, my personal philosophy of life, interviewing people like you, interesting and fun and lovely and amazing people. All of that, all of those things to me make up a creative, connected life. And so that's what I do to make myself feel satisfied. So from a creative standpoint. So I don't know many people that have just one thing they do that completely ticks all the boxes for them. I think you have to do separate things.
I had a moment. This was back in 2007. I had campaigned to audition for the Transformers movie, the Michael Bay Transformers movie back then. And I got my audition. I created a comic book. I don't know if I ever showed you this. I created a comic book with the help of some of my friends in the art community to send to Steven Spielberg and Michael Bay that featured me in a story with the Transformers.
Nice.
Just saying, hey, I want a chance to audition because I lived in Maryland.
Right.
I didn't have a fancy agent. I didn't have any of the tools that most actors have. And I had to think outside of the box to get seen, because my motto is it's the squeaky wheel that gets the grease.
Right.
And so with that, I booked the video game. They booked me as the lead villain for the game Starscream.
Nice.
And one of my favorite characters of all time, Decepticons, this is Starscream. And I got to go to the convention for the first time. That's where I met David Kay. I met Peter Cullen, and I'm sitting next to both of them, and I'm signing autographs. And I'm like, how am I here? How am I here doing this?
Because you made it happen. That's why you were there.
Well, that was a learning lesson for me.
Yeah.
But in that moment, it was still for me.
Yeah.
It was me. Oh, I'm here. I'm signing autographs because people want my autograph. Oh,
Right.
This is me. My ego was talking.
Yeah.
There was a girl who came up to me and she gave me a big hug, and she's giving me artwork that she had drawn of the character, and she's talking up a storm about how much she loves it. And there was a woman standing behind her who was crying her eyes out. And I'm like, this is an interesting situation. How do I deal with this? Okay, well, she said her piece and moved on to Peter Cullen's line. And the woman who was crying came up and she threw her arms around me and she said, I don't know who you are or what it is you really do, but my daughter, who you just spoke to, is nonverbal autistic and hasn't spoken in 5 years. God bless you.
Uh-huh.
And I had a moment where it was like, huh? Wait, what? I had nothing to do with that. I had nothing to do with her coming. I simply booked a job and I did a thing. But that meant so much to
Right.
that particular individual. And that was the epiphany for me that this reaches broader depths than my own ambitions.
Mm-hmm.
This reaches the very fabric of people's solace
Mm-hmm.
and their developmental times and times that they need something to uplift themselves. We gravitate towards our favorite characters. We watch our favorite shows. And I
Right.
remember being a kid sitting in front of Saturday morning cartoons and watching and being enveloped by those stories and influenced by those characters. Donald Duck was a huge influence at that time, imitating that voice and doing those characters. A through line of joy for me throughout my life. And as soon as I realized that, I felt like the direction of why I do this became very different.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been very fortunate to do a lot of legacy characters. Obviously, Donald Duck. I've been
Right.
Lucky the Leprechaun. Um, Most recently, for a video game called Multiverses, I play Gizmo and Stripe from the Gremlins
Oh,
movies,
that's awesome.
and Uncle Shagworthy from the Scooby Doo franchise. And stepping into those roles and all the love and joy that's associated with that franchise is something that I now get to play with, and I get to revel in the joy with the fans
Yeah.
of those properties, and that is something that I never anticipated getting into
No.
this industry.
It gets you out of your head a little bit too, because I think it's an important way to look at it. And it's a valuable point to make for anyone watching this that is an aspiring voice actor or just aspiring artist. So much of your ego is bound up in it. And it's even more true, I think, when we're younger because we just haven't lived enough and we're thinking, once I get enough people to know who I am and I get famous and I get rich, well, then I'll feel fulfilled. I'll feel whole. It's very magical thinking, and I'm certainly not immune to it. And when I was younger, my exact thinking was, I have to become famous, or I'm not going to be happy. This will mean I'm successful when I'm rich and famous, which is a really juvenile way of looking at things, but I was a juvenile. And it started to turn for me a little bit when I was doing just modest on-camera work over at Nickelodeon. You would do some kind of like variety show. Like I would guest star on All That or Keenan and Kel. And then after you're done, you're wrapped. Sometimes there would be kids there, and they would have an autograph book because this was the 90s. Nobody did selfies then. And I would sign it, and I would think, why are you having me sign this? I'm nobody. I'm a bit player. And I realized not to the kid. And I thought, okay, there really is more at work here than my own ego, just like you discovered. And I still had a long way to go to grow up. But the more I did voice acting and the more I started connecting with people outside of voice acting, the more people would track me down either online or ask for a cameo video or even well before then, when you would do the occasional convention and see the impact the characters you voiced had on people, you realize, you can be happy that you're working and feel proud that you're working, and at the same time realize that there's much, much more to this equation, that you are helping someone make a connection, and you should frankly feel even better about that than you should about anything that has to do with you. So and that's why I say, when you ask what makes me feel good, connecting is extremely important to me. And if I'm just throwing things out there and no one's ever experiencing them or discovering them or engaging with me on them, they're not going to be nearly as satisfying. So I don't know, maybe at 53 I've grown up just enough to understand that. And as always, I look at you and think, well, I'm glad you figured it out earlier than I did.
You only got 10 years on me, man.
Yeah, I know. But that's the other thing. For all you young'uns out there, yes, you're young now. And before you know it, you're going to be thinking, wait, when did that happen? How long ago was that? You're going to look back at you right now in 20 or 30 years and think you're a completely different person. It's like, that must have happened to someone else. I can't even believe that. And yeah, that's just, if you're lucky, that's the way you'll feel about it. It'll just go by like that.
Indeed. Again, I count my lucky blessings. I count my stars that I'm here and doing what I love. The fact that I get to do a job that I love on a regular basis is more than I could have asked for because I put in a lot of years doing things I didn't want to do just to survive.
Right.
And I'm not a rich person. I'm not wealthy. I've got a lot of room to grow in terms of building my business. But I'm here. I'm doing what I want. I'm present, and there's not much more I could ask for.
Right.
Maybe a goal at this point. I am single, but
Yeah.
outside of that, I'm happy to be working. Maybe
Daniel Ross is available. Are you doing are you doing a lot of conventions? Is that a circuit you're busy on?
I'm not very busy on the convention circuit. I'd like to be, but I am repped with CelebWorks, and they do send me out for certain things.
Gotcha.
When it comes to, again, legacy characters like Donald Duck, for example, that's been my biggest credit thus far.
Right.
There are two of us who do that voice, and there are
Right.
different properties that we've worked on that resonate with different people. And my small little window of, working with that character, most of those are preschool. They've
Yeah.
got to grow up. They've still got to
Right.
grow up before they're going to, request me to come to the conventions. But these days, I kid you not, most people know me from TikTok. And I can't believe that.
That's
I've been to conventions where people walk up to my table and say, I know you from TikTok. Oh, you do these voices and characters? And I'm like, well, if you follow me on TikTok, you would know that.
Yeah. Could you sign this ketchup and mustard dispenser? Could you squirt me with ketchup and mustard, please? Please, Mr. Ross, do this thing.
Oh, man. I'm just waiting for that opportunity.
Yeah,
That or somebody's baby.
I have to say, you never know. You never know what's going to click. I mean, I was advised by my agents because I asked. They didn't track me down and say, listen, you're going to get social media or... But I did say, okay, what am I not doing? Every now and then I do a State of the Union. All right, how can I help you help me? And they said, as much as we hate to admit it, TikTok is very, very popular. So for about 2 weeks, I had a TikTok, and then I took it down again. I said, no, this is not for me. It's too much work. And I've already got a Twitter, which I don't do a whole lot on, but I do something. And I've already got a Twitch, and I have a YouTube, and I have a few things. And I just thought I'm spreading myself a little too thin. And I know, as you said, you started TikTok and you thought, this isn't going to become something, is it? And then it does. So
Yeah.
again, yeah, a lot of these chats I like to have end up being informative for people who want to be where you're sitting right now. I mean, I want to have an Emmy behind me. Who doesn't? As much as you say, I don't do this for the awards. No, I don't do it for the awards. But it's a nice bit of gravy for the industry to say, we acknowledge that you did something, and we're going to single you out for a moment. And now you're going to have to shower and put on a tux and show up and accept it. But that's I don't know of very many honest actors that would say that didn't mean anything to them. I think almost everybody would recognize that, yeah, it's a nice bauble, but it's what is wrapped up in the meaning of that really counts. That these are people that do the same work I do, and they voted, and they chose my performance. So, yeah, I mean, that's for people who want to be sitting where you're sitting. You probably shouldn't rule out very much at all, especially starting out. You probably should try anything you can that you can stomach. Don't make yourself hate yourself, right? But keep an open mind.
The Emmy meant a lot to me. I
Yeah.
mean, no doubt. What an honor in and of itself. But for me, it was when I walked into that room filled with my peers and colleagues and other storytellers, story makers. I think back on a saying that I like to say about cartoon characters, and that they are venerated echoes of our past and custodians of our childhood, the one through line, the one constant that will always be here no matter how the world changes. And I got to sit in the room with the people who were crafting
Right.
the fabric of what the next generations are going to hold dear
Right.
in their lives. The child inside of them that they cultivate or nurture, they are going to be an integral part of that. And I'm in the same room
Yeah.
with all of those people, let alone to have the honor and to get up on stage in front of all of them and share a little piece of my story. For me, it was honoring my mom, who I lost last year to cancer, again, who taught me the voice. Mickey and Minnie Wish Upon a Christmas was the last thing we watched together, holding hands. And that journey meant so much to me to signify that with that honor in that way. I don't know how I held back the tears. I really don't. I think I dissociated a little in the moment, but it was mind boggling. And then, of course, you wake up the next day and it's a Tuesday.
Yeah.
And you say, all my dreams just came true.
Yeah.
What happens next?
And then
What
you've
happens?
noticed, you've got some auditions in your inbox. And then you realize the world is still turning. Right.
That's right.
Yeah. And Rob Paulson talked about that.
With you that was on my TikTok. I've had this little piece of paper in my wallet since I was in high school, since I studied Shakespeare, after I was on the street and everything else and figured out what I wanted to do. I heard the story about how Jim Carrey
wrote himself a check
for $1 million and kept it with him. So I wrote myself an IOU for an Academy Award, whatever that meant.
Yeah.
And it has followed me. And in my darkest times, I'd reach into my wallet and I'd look at that and remind myself of the journey that I was on. And so to get there, what do I even do with this? I said I was going to tear it up, but I can't quite do it. I can't bring myself to do it.
Yeah, well, you still don't have an Academy Award yet, so there's that.
I got to go for the event.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, an Emmy.
Oh, man.
Everybody will find their own motivator. So for Jim Carrey, I think he was staring out at the Hollywood Hills, as a lot of actors do and dreamers do. They drive up to Mulholland and they look out and they see that magical grid of lights in the valley below, and they think, okay, I'm here in this town. What am I going to do? And Jim Carrey, I guess at a certain point, he had kind of hit a low point. He says, all right, I'm writing myself a check for $10 million for services rendered. He pulled it out on The Tonight Show. And he used that as a way of telling himself, all right, you're good enough. All right, you've already done enough, but there's more in store for you. And I'm going to keep this to remind myself. It becomes sort of a totem, right? You did the same thing. And for some people, it can be more abstract. It can just be an idea they have in their head. When I get to X, Y, or Z, I'll feel as though I have done enough, and then I can maybe get off my back a little bit. Maybe I can ease up a little bit on what I expect from myself in a negative way. We tend to ride ourselves a little hard sometimes. And for me, I remember, as I said, I thought, I have to be famous and rich, otherwise I'm going to feel like I didn't make it. And I realize now that's a very narrow way of looking at it. Now, I've done just fine in my career, and I'm living better than I ever thought that I would. But I also can tell myself, you've worked on a lot of really fun things. You've made some great friends. You really like the life you have. You like who your partner is in your marriage. You love your kids. You love what you do. And at least currently, you have good health. You don't need to be rich, and you don't need to be famous. You have to like what you do, and you have to like yourself. And so and
you made a lot of people laugh and a lot of people smile, thereby making this world just a
scintilla better. Yeah, you are busy doing something that concretely other people value because they've told you as much. Or, I'm sure you've done this plenty of times, someone has handed you the phone. Oh, could you please do so-and-so for this person? And on the other end of the line, you hear them going completely bonkers. So, for those of you out there, who feel the need to write something down, fine, challenge yourself. Do something, do whatever it is you need to do. But on the other end of that has to be a journey that results in you being happy with what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. There is no real finish line. The finish line is the grave. So, that's when you're in your coffin or your ashes are scattered, then you're done. Until then, There's no point where you're just going to say, well, that's it, I'm done doing stuff.
That's unless you've uploaded your consciousness to some type of, a backup system, or you've turned yourself into an android. We don't know what the future's going to be.
Like Walt did, I guess. Who knows? Yeah. But yes, the time you have right now, what are you going to do with it? Well, if you need to write yourself a note or a letter or challenge yourself, then by all means do it. Because the whole point of this is to get the most out of yourself, right? What are you going to do to get the most out of yourself? And make sure that getting the most out of yourself is in service of creating something that you can be proud of, connecting with somebody else, be proud of that too. And the end result of riches, fame, that's so far beyond what you're in control of, it's better to just think about those immediate things, right? How can I nail this audition? Or in your case, how can I manufacture an audition out of sheer balls? I'm going to do a damn comic, right?
Well, again, it was just thinking outside of the box. Nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Right.
Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Yeah. And even submitting for the Emmys, I submitted myself for the Emmys. And if I hadn't taken that opportunity, it wouldn't have happened.
That still kills me to hear that you had to be the one to do it, and then it resulted in an Emmy.
Well, if you want to get it done right.
Yeah. I have a friend, a good friend of mine. Yeah, I was roommates with him out here for a while. He was on a soap for a season or two, and he submitted himself because I guess at the time his manager didn't really think to do it. He submitted himself for this part that he had heard about, and he lived in LA and the part was cast in New York, but he sent in a tape on his own, and apparently he found out later the writer of that character was walking by the open door of the office of the casting director where they were looking at different submitted auditions. And they saw my friend's audition and they said, that's my guy. That's who I want. Bring him in. And so he was flown out to New York for a screen test and he nailed it and got the part. And like you, it was because he completely made it happen on his own. Nobody made a call. Nobody put him first in line. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. And that gave him dozens and dozens of episodes as this character. You never know.
You never know. You never know.
I tell people they eat it. Cheese.
I'll tell you a story, Archie.
That one's going back to the 70s. A lot of people aren't going to get that. I've mentioned this before on other chats I've done. I could tell you how I got to where I am right now, being on The Simpsons, starting all the way back in 1994 when I was in my apartment in Orlando and I had worked just enough as a comic. I'd done a little bit of, auditions here and there for random things, but no agents or anything. And then I cold called an agency in Orlando, just pulling their name out of the phone book, because you could do that then. And based on that, I got a meeting. They took me on as a client. I booked a few things. That led to the next step, which led to the next step. But it's all, at a certain point, for anyone watching this, you've got to do something. You can't wait for something to land in your lap.
That's right.
Learned anything from Daniel.
You got to go out and take your opportunities. For me and the Ninjas Versus movies and my buddy Justin and I, it was watching Clerks 2 when they decided they were going to buy the quick stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They were frustrated being employees. They were going to buy it and be their own bosses. And we looked at each other and we're like, what? Let's do that. Let's make our own movie.
Right.
And that was the beginning of something just so beautiful. And so, that's how it happens.
That begs an interesting question to get into the nuts and bolts of this. If you sell a movie to Netflix, if you get a distribution deal, all of that, I guess the devil's in the details, but accounting-wise, people are going to think, oh, well, then you must have made millions of dollars. You have to remind them, no, that's not really how it works. We didn't make it for much money, and so chances are we're not going to get a sweetheart of a deal. We're not Rian Johnson making the next couple of Knives Out movies. But how does the finance work out when you make a movie on your own dime and then somebody like Netflix comes along? Because Netflix is the Hoover vacuum of content. They just take everything and throw it out there. So how does that deal work? Who structures that for you?
Man, we made thousands thousands of cents. Working with Netflix.
We made tens of dollars.
It has nothing to do specifically with Netflix, but we had signed with a film distributor.
Okay.
And in our naivete, there are different deals that you can get when working with a distributor. And one of those deals, I don't remember if it was the first. I think it was the first one. I think it was Ninjas versus Zombies, where they purchase like 10 different independent films, and if one of them is profitable, then that pays the debt on all the other purchases until it starts to make a profit.
Okay.
So our money just kind of disappeared into the ether, and it wasn't lucrative. It really was just because we wanted to do it.
Right.
To this day, all these movies have been out and in the world. I think Ninjas versus Vampires was on the list of the top 10 illegally downloaded movies of 2010.
Really?
And we didn't make bupkis. We didn't make anything. The only thing we made was the family of individuals that were passionate enough to sacrifice their time and their creative energy to come together and make something we all thought was really cool and really fun. And to this day, those are some of my dearest friends, my ninja family, my ninja crew.
Right.
And to me, that's worth its weight in gold. It didn't help me, I think, what was it? I paid my rent with experience, and maybe a taco from Taco Bell. And not even a Supreme taco, just a regular run-of-the-mill.
Yeah.
It wasn't lucrative. It wasn't something that I could do for the rest of my life and live comfortably. I had to work a second job.
Right.
But I would have happily worked a second job and made independent films with my friends for the rest of my life because it made me happy.
Right.
The dynamic has shifted. Now I'm in my career and trying to keep a roof over my head and being as creative as I possibly can to do that. That is the struggle of a working actor, and it's a great thing to participate in that because I know so many other people have.
Right.
And I'll leave with this.
Yeah.
When I moved to Los Angeles, I did all the touristy things, the Hollywood Walk of Fame, Chinese theater, and all that stuff. And it didn't sit with me. It wasn't the magic that I attributed to this long distant land of Los Angeles, so far away, the land of Hollywood, where dreams are made. It just didn't sit with me until I took a hike. And I went up to it's a place called the Wisdom Tree, up on the top of, I think, Burbank. And on that is the ridge where you can go and see the Hollywood sign, but you're behind the Hollywood sign. And so I hiked up to the Hollywood sign, and I knew what the sign meant to me as an actor, and seeing it on the hill, and oh my gosh, I'm here. But going behind it and then seeing all the nuts and bolts and all the struts and the things that held it up, and realizing that somebody had to go up there and crank that in and put it up there to create that symbol, to create that iconic symbol, that meant more to me than anything else. And so to participate and to basically say, hey, I'm putting in one of my own nuts and bolts into the Hollywood sign to help create the whole.
Right.
That meant so much to me, and that really opened my eyes to what I'm doing here and how it all works.
I think that makes a lot of sense as well, because I didn't really think of it in those terms, but I think I've had a parallel experience. When I came out here, I did do the touristy things, and I love touristy stuff to a degree. So yeah, I've seen the Hollywood sign, although the first time I saw the Hollywood sign was because I was actually a working actor. I came out as a comic, and then I was doing a set at the Comedy Store where I tanked, didn't go well. But my friend at the time, he was driving me around. He showed me the Hollywood sign, and I was coming out here because I was working. And then I later on did a guest star on Keenan and Kel. They were shooting on that stage on Sunset, where if you look out, you see the Hollywood sign. I've never been behind the Hollywood sign, but for me, when it really landed was when I went to a studio lot where you see the back lot. When you see the back lot, right, and not just the Universal Studios back lot tour. When you're there, because they have a W-2 with your name on it, or a 1099 with your name on it, or whatever. You know that, okay, I'm now part of that big machine that cranks out the dreams. I'm one of the nuts or bolts. That, to me, like with you, when I saw everybody doing their little job, and I was doing my little job, and at the end of it was another dream that we were throwing out into the world, that's when it all landed for me as well. When I knew that I was there to work, to be a part of it. Because any tourist can go and see the Hollywood sign or Grauman's Chinese, or put on a Spider-Man outfit and put out a hat and take pictures and make some money. But not everybody gets to do what you get to do. Not everybody gets to be one of those tiny little cogs in that wonderful machine. So,
Or even, I think my first studio experience was Warner Brothers, and just going on a casual tour and going into the woodworking shop and seeing them put together the A-frames for the stuff on the shows and in the
yeah,
studios, like seeing them actually do that.
right.
That's the kind of stuff that fills me up inside.
Yeah.
So yeah, seeing the Hollywood sign from behind with all the nuts and bolts, and then seeing the sprawling city in front of that,
Yeah.
it was such a unique and different perspective that put it all into perspective for me.
It
And
does.
that's what I always remember. If my ego ever jumps in and says, yeah, you're hot stuff.
Yeah.
No, I think about that moment, and I think about sitting on that little cliff there, looking at that and just observing and remembering that it's a tiny piece of the big equation, and you're fortunate enough to be a part of that.
Yeah. And you can feel connected to the people who came before you because I'm doing what you were doing. Even if I'm not doing it in the same capacity, I'm filling the same kind of purpose. If you see an actor from a movie in the 1930s or 40s, no matter how classic it is or how much of a disposable film it was, you were part of that unbroken line that leads back to them and even before them of making dreams, making entertainments for people, sometimes hitting them even more profoundly than that. And it's an unbroken chain of human effort and dreams and dashed dreams sometimes. But again, we're all nuts and bolts. And yeah, like you say, you can let your ego get too heavy in the equation. Sometimes it is good to look behind the scenery and see somebody had to make that. You're part of that. Be a part of that instead of thinking about how long the spotlight's on you.
Exactly. So again, from my perspective, if I ever get to go to like one of the Disney parks,
Yeah.
being a tiny little cog in that machine, I'll go sit on a bench and I'll people watch.
Yeah.
And I'll reminisce and revel in the fact that they're there experiencing that magic for the first time. The characters are bright and vibrant and alive.
Yeah.
And I got to play in that sandbox.
Right.
It just,
Yeah.
I love that.
I've done a couple of rides. I'm not the legacy characters I've done are not Donald. It's Scuttle from The Little Mermaid and Timothy Mouse. These are characters, and every now and then somebody will hear one, and I'll think, great, they're hearing what I did, and I did that. Geez, I recorded that 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and it's still there. So yeah, I totally get where you're coming from, and I think there are people that might be watching this right now are thinking, one day that's going to be me, and you know what? You're right. One day it is going to be you. But nothing ventured, nothing gained.
That's right.
Remember
That's
that,
right.
kids.
So
From
now,
Uncle Daniel.
speaking of which, so now nothing ventured, nothing gained. Now we have to combine our forces to see if we can get back on the Tom and Jerry show.
Yeah, we have to. All right, well, you start on that comic.
That's right.
I can't. I'm not much of an artist.
I said it's a renegade.
Yeah, let's hit them up. Let's start a crowdfunding.
Yeah.
Whatever works. It would be nice to revisit those mice. That was fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It would.
So where can people find you? Where's your TikTok? Where are your other social medias? Where can they find Daniel Ross?
Yes, thank you. If you would like to follow me on social media, I've made it very easy for you. My handle is actor Daniel Ross across social media, the Instagrammies, the Twitters, the Facebookies, the Twitches, and the TikToks. That's actor Daniel Ross. And guess what my website is? actordanielross.com. So that's all the information there. Please do check it out. As far as other things you might hear me in, multiverses, I play Gizmo, Stripe, Uncle Shagworthy. That won Best Fighter Game of 2022 at the Video Game Awards. Diablo Immortal. I'm doing a lot of video games these days, so listen out for me. And thank you again for having me, Chris.
That is
This was a lot
awesome.
of fun.
No, it's great. It was my pleasure to touch base. And it's great to hear you're doing all of these things. Those are really cool credits, I just have to tell you.
It's
Gizmo and Stripe
yeah,
alone.
I'm
Now I'm
enjoying every
intimidated
minute
by
of
you.
it. We've come full circle.
Yes. Now, well, Daniel, we will touch base again soon. And thanks so much for popping in.
My pleasure, man. Take it easy.
You too.